Well, good evening and welcome back to another Student Worship to Go. We're so glad you're joining us tonight. Hopefully, student events will be kicking off, real soon, and there may actually be one going on right now. But hopefully our high schoolers will tune in, and maybe some of our junior high will be watching this later, a little later. But for our adults, we will also continue to do this for a little while, just to kind of make sure, we're getting good word out and you have something to come to on your Wednesday nights. We're so glad that you're joining with us. So we're going to keep doing these for the time being. I'm so excited. We're starting a new series this week in Ecclesiastes and kind of discovering what the meaning of life really is, kind of. And so I'm so excited that you're joining with us, and I hope you'll join us in worship.
riches of your love will nothing compares to your embrace, light of the world, forever reign.
Well, again, guys, welcome back to another Student Worship to Go. We are so glad that you're with us, and like I said earlier, we're kicking off a new series this week, and it's going to be in Ecclesiastes. And we're not going to read all the way through the book of Ecclesiastes, but we're going to kind of do the first few chapters here. We're going to take a good look as we kind of figure out meaning, and we kind of have arrived at this series just with the whirlwind of 2020. Man, what a year, right? I mean, I remember, it seems like January was 3 years ago. It's been so long. And just everything we've done since then. And, I remember in January we thought, like everybody my age was saying, World War III is about to happen. We were about to go to war with Iran. And then, of course, everything, the Australian wildfires. And then we had coronavirus start, showing its head, and then we ended up all being isolated for, 2.5 months, and we're finally just now getting over that. And then even to now, as we face extreme racial tension all across our great nation, and man, it just can seem pointless, can it? It just kind of can, and just the fact that we've seen these things before over and over and over, and it kind of can make you reach out and say, God, why? God, why? Like, why is this happening? What is the point of all this, God? I would have thought that we'd have solved these racial issues 30 years ago. Why are these still happening? Why are these things still coming at us? God, why have so many people had to die from this coronavirus? God, why? But that's one of the amazing things about our God is that He is not afraid of your why. He is not afraid of you asking questions. And He is loving that we are approaching Him in this time saying, God, help me understand. And so that's why we have turned to the book of Ecclesiastes, because we see in here some of these same questions. A little bit of background about the book of Ecclesiastes, if you don't know. The author of Ecclesiastes is never specifically mentioned. He's always either mentioned as the teacher or the preacher. But through different references and things throughout the book, most people agree, and keeping most, there are, of course, strong scholars that suggest otherwise, but most people agree that the author of this book is King Solomon. And a lot of two of those main references being right there off in verse 1, it says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So the son of David, the king of Jerusalem. Elsewhere in the Bible, he says, or elsewhere in this book, it says he has great wisdom and great wealth, and he references problems of bureaucracy, all things that would point to a king of some kind, especially of later Israel, as they would have been, Solomon is kind of considered the peak of the Israelite nation, and before they split and before the different warring factions come in and wipe them out for different reasons, and so it is assumed that the most likely candidate for authorship is Solomon here in this point. But the story of Ecclesiastes itself, if you know nothing about Ecclesiastes, it asks some of these hard kind of questions. What is the meaning? And it kind of matches up with Solomon's life story. As you know, Solomon starts off a great king. And he starts off happy and joyful, and he asks for wisdom, and God blesses him with both wisdom and wealth. But if you're familiar with the life of Solomon, as Solomon's life goes, he begins to engage in relationships and marriages with all these women of foreign lands, and they begin to pull his heart away from God. And he becomes kind of obsessed with wealth and power and wisdom and all these things. And so this would make sense in the life of Solomon for him to hit a point like this, a point like we are now, saying, God, we have all these things, all this technology, all of these, things. We consider ourselves to be so modern. But yet, why do we struggle with these things? And so kind of in the timeline, if it is indeed Solomon that wrote this book, this would be towards the end of Solomon's life. Solomon is kind of credited with writing 3 books of the Bible. The first being Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, which would have been written early in his lifetime when he was still full of joy and passion. It's all about, relationship, especially the marital relationship, but even covers some like dating aspects, courtship aspects, things like that. Not all Proverbs are attributed to Solomon, but the majority of them are. And those would have been written throughout his lifetime, kind of beginning, middle, end, as he was blessed with great wisdom straight from God. And then again, Ecclesiastes would be at the end as he kind of reaches a breaking point, if you will. A point where he again is like, what is the point of all this if I'm still so unsatisfied? And so I want us to read it here. We're going to be in chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to start right at the very beginning. And we're going to read all the way through chapter 1. It's only 18 verses, but Ecclesiastes 1:1, starting there. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and then goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind. On its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new, it has been already in the ages before us? There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases sorrow. Now this is kind of bleak, right? It's not a very great outlook, and it can be kind of hard to read. But I think it's so applicable to our world right here and right now. Because see, Ecclesiastes, the way it is written so it appeals to multiple people. Not only does it apply to Israel and their current situation, but it would also apply to many of the nations that surrounded Israel at that time, in which Solomon would have had interactions with. It also applies to here and now in our generation. It's applied to every generation that has come before. It is for everyone who has ever had sincere questions about life or sincere questions about the nature of God. It appeals to the non-believer, but Solomon is also very intentional about stating where this wisdom comes from, right? He says he is the preacher. And the word there is one who calls the assembly, one who would have been giving words from God. And so while Solomon addresses that, the ideas and maybe the thoughts of a non-believer would identify with, he is also quick to point out, hey, this is wisdom that is coming from God, that has been bestowed to me directly from God. So, kind of speaking in a way as you would sit down for lunch with a mentor. One of my greatest mentors in my life is my grandfather, and I love to go over to his house when I get the chance to go home. I love to go over to his house and sit down and have great conversations, either about the Bible or about life in general with my grandfather. And I love to get to pull on his wisdom. When I'm here, I like to go into, if I have a hard question, about, how should I handle this as a minister? I like to go and sit down with and ask Pastor Chip that question and get him from a minister who's been there and done more than me to input into me, into my life, into my ministry. I do the same with Steve and Bruce and all the ministers. And so here we get to kind of, as you would sit down with your grandfather, sit down with King Solomon, the wisest of all, and have a great wisdom talk and seek through these questions and these meanings, knowing that we're going to get some good godly advice here. And so here are some things that Solomon notes about the world around him, having lived his life. He speaks in three kind of different settings. He speaks as a scientist first, though. And as we see here, he talks about, the sun rises and the sun goes down. He talks about, the passing of time and how, the seasons, they come and go. The sun comes up, comes down. He talks about the wind. The wind is constantly changing directions, coming from this way and then that way and then back from this way, right? Even in the sense of maybe even like, a hurricane or a tropical storm like we just had, that literally can even directly circle itself. He talks even about, he kind of is crazy too, like you wouldn't think, but he's onto the water cycle even. As that early in history, humans were thinking about the water cycle and how, right, the streams come from here and they go to the ocean, right, and then the streams are refilled and they continue flowing. It's one big circle. In fact, we see how he takes this notion of a circle and he applies it to all parts of life. Human beings are cyclical creatures, and we reflect the world around us. Moving on, he says, there is nothing new under the sun, right? There is nothing new. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been done in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. That's really hard for us to hear in our time, in our day and age, right? In a day and age where we, like many of you have seen people go to the moon, right? For me, that's still even an ancient kind of memory, right? Way before I was born, people went to the moon. I hold a computer in my hand daily that I can contact just about anybody on the globe to their computer, right? And just the fact of having a cell phone. How can Solomon say there is nothing new under the sun? The fact is, he's not talking about technological advancements or anything. He's talking about as a historian. He's talking about his people and the things we do over and over and over again. I had a history teacher I was really fond of in high school, and he taught my AP classes, and he said, if you ever want to predict the future, study history. And he would show us the patterns throughout history as humans would repeat itself. It's a very fond phrase of us to say we are living in unprecedented times. That's really not the truth. We're living in unprecedented times for our minds. But the reality is this is not the first global pandemic that the world has lived through. There was a Spanish fever, Some of our people still living today remember the Spanish influenza. Back in the Middle Ages, there was the bubonic plague that killed a third of the world's known population, is what they suggest. Pandemics are not new. racial tensions, quite obviously, are not new, and that's the reason for the protests, right? It seems we face the same issues over and over and over again. And the reason we do is the history and the wisdom here that Solomon gives us. There is no remembrance for former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. We as humanity are quick to forget history and make those mistakes over and over again. We are caught in that cycle. And then finally, philosophically speaking, right, he kind of approaches wisdom. And he says, I've done the thinking, I've done the experimenting, right? Verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Solomon had the time and the resources to do social experimentation, to study people, to watch and do the things. He had done the research. He had asked the questions. But yet he had found no answers, it seems. Why do we do things as we do? As a matter of fact, we see where he does not think things can change at this point. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. Even so much so, he thinks his wisdom a curse. It is because I have been so wise. Most people live their lives and they don't think about these things, basically is what he's saying. But because of my wisdom, I have been brought to more problems and more strife because I have thought about these things. Ignorance is bliss, right? More wisdom, more problems. So think about that when you go asking God for wisdom. With it will come greater struggle. And I know what you're thinking. That's very bleak. I don't know if I want to go through this Ecclesiastes study if it's going to be all depressing and things like this. But I think it's important because, like I said, Solomon is experiencing many things like many of you out there may be experiencing today. Whether it's, whether you're an adult or you're a student. Many of my students are anxious and worried about college. They're busy preparing, taking the ACT, getting all work. I got to find a dorm room. If you're a senior, I got to do all this. I got to do all this. I got to do all this. What if I don't make this team? What if I don't do this? If you're an adult, man, many of you just lost your jobs due to this corona thing. You're unemployed. What about this? Where is the country headed? We got a presidential campaign coming up here in a little bit. What is the state of the world right now? It's all nonsense. It's beyond my reasoning. I cannot make any logical sense of this world. So let's sit down with the wisest man known to the world and let's have a conversation. And that's the intent of what we plan to do here over these next couple weeks. But let's reach some logical conclusions today with Solomon. And so there are kind of three things that I want you to see about the world, and then we'll make a conclusion at the end as well. First thing that I want you to see, the world is fleeting. The world is fleeting. The word that pops up there at the very beginning, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. That word vanity, some of your Bibles may say meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless. It's all meaningless. That word is Hebel. And it's mentioned 38 times in this book. In the book of Ecclesiastes, not the whole word, but it's mentioned other times as well. And a more literal translation of this word is breath or vapor. And we see this word in other places throughout the Bible. It's used in Psalms 39:5, and it says, "Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths." Again, that word, Hebel. "And my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath." Hebel. Every man at his best is a mere breath. And also in James chapter 4, verse 14. So it's kind of to bring similarly across about how it would be used. Why do you not even know, or why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. That mist, that would be the word, the vapor. So those two kind of illustrate. And then what Solomon's real intention would be here. Life is short. It's nothing. Gone. As quickly as the fog comes in the morning, by midday it is no longer existence. You wouldn't have known it was there. It is but a breath, but a whisper. Steam comes up from boiling water, and you see it for a few seconds, and then it's gone. Such is our lives. And again, that's very depressing, bleak, to think our lives are so meaningless and so worthless and just so here today and gone tomorrow. But there's another key phrase to focus in on. Verse 3, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Under the sun. We see that phrase, under the sun, come again and again, and it's mentioned throughout this book of the Bible as well, this phrase, under the sun. And it's in that phrase that the whole principle of this book is hinged, under the sun. Solomon is telling us everything that is under the sun is meaningless. And we will dive a little bit more into next week some more, but to see that a life that invests everything in things that are under the sun is a life that is meaningless or empty. It is. I was recently cleaning out from under a house in Clinton, and there was this guy had set up a little workshop underneath them things, and I'm sure he had several things in there you could tell like were little knickknacks and things or memories and things that he had saved. And when I was cleaning out that thing, and it was kind of a mess, and we were just throwing things out, just things that were probably important to him, but things that meant nothing to us. And we were just chunking them and getting rid of them. And it's like kind of way maybe might be throwing away memories. You see, that man is gone, and his things matter no more to us. And thus is the state of our lives. But that, again, points to the thing, how much more should we invest in things that are not under the sun? If we build our lives on things that are here in this world, eventually we'll be gone, and your grandkids might divide up what they want and then throw out the rest. Invest in things that are not under the sun. So that's the first thing, is the world is fleeting. The second thing is the world forgets quickly. The world forgets quickly. There's a famous line from Babe Ruth, and it says, it's quote, he says, heroes are remembered, but legends never die. Heroes are remembered, but legends never die. There are a few legends in this world, right? Babe Ruth might be one of them. Michael Jordan might be one of them. Famous people throughout history, everybody knows, George Washington, not only because he's on the dollar, but he's like the first president, There are names throughout history. Alexander the Great, for either good or bad reasons, we know their names. Everybody knows who they are. They are legendary for something. And then there are heroes, people who are around for a short while, but then once those who remembered them are gone, they are nothing. And I think to the sports heroes of my dad's day, or even my grandfather's day, names that they know that were household names back in the day. And I see this all the time if you ever watch, the Hall of Fame candidates. You think about these big names, they were Hall of Fame level players, and I have no clue who they are. Because I don't remember them. I never watched them play. And when the people that did watch them play move on, they too will be forgotten. But what if you're like me and you're just an average person? You haven't done anything of acclaim. You know, and if you don't go to First Baptist Jackson, you're really not watching these videos even, you know, like even if this is the highlight of my career thus far. Just average. We have a select few people that will remember, you know, the people that love us and care about us. And then they move on. And the world moves on. And again, that's so bleak, isn't it? And that's so crazy to think about. But again, we see Solomon's state of mind. This is where he is. He's saying, man, it's all meaningless. Everything that I'm doing here seems pointless. When I die, it's just going to all be split up and be given away, and nobody's ever going to remember my name or care. But again, if the world moves on, how much more should we invest in things that aren't here? Putting our treasures in places that won't move on. Put your treasure in a place where you're going, not where you're leaving. Putting our treasures in heaven. Putting our work and our time and our effort for God, the place where we're going. So the world is fleeting. The world forgets quickly. And finally, one more point about the world is the world doesn't satisfy. The world doesn't satisfy. There's a very famous interview from 2005, and it's a 60 Minutes overtime, so a 60-minute sport edition, basically. And it's featuring Tom Brady. And at that point, you know, that's kind of when I was starting to get into sports back then. And so Tom Brady had just won his third Super Bowl as a New England Patriot. He'd only ever played for the Patriots at that point. And so he had just won his third Super Bowl as a New England Patriot. And it's this interview is very famous because Tom Brady says in this interview, and I quote, "Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think that there is something greater out there for me?" He would go on to say, "I think that there's more to it than this. More to it than this success and in football even." And then when confronted with the question, from the interviewer, what do you think the answer is? And I really encourage you to go watch this video. It's quite interesting to see. And he literally says, "I wish I knew what the answer was." And paraphrasing, I think, he's like, "There's some things about me that I still need to figure out." You know what? He's right at the time. And I hope he found the real answer. But he's right at the time, because if we're looking at the world, Tom Brady should be a man that's at the pinnacle, right? He's at the top of his game. He's at age 27. He is one of the most respected and well-known athletes in the world. He has achieved the pinnacle of his sport, the Super Bowl, 3 times, been a Super Bowl MVP. He is up there with the biggest names that have ever played his game. He's a household name. And he is sitting there wondering, why do I still think there's something greater out there for me? There's got to be more to it than this. And we Christians are sitting here with that answer, right? The answer is our purpose, our calling, our Father. That is the only thing that satisfies. Because without it, our efforts are fleeting and forgotten and not even satisfactory while we're here. Because, you know, Solomon did the same thing. Solomon was at the pinnacle. He was king of a great nation, the best king that Israel had ever seen. He had expanded the kingdom farther than any other kingdom, past that of his father David. He was the most wealthy king. He was the wisest person in the world to that point, literally even maybe the wisest person the world has ever seen past him. He was the pinnacle. And here he is wondering, what's it worth? There's got to be something better. So we must focus on things that will satisfy. We talked about in our study of Colossians, right, how Paul was satisfied by fulfilling his calling, by going towards what God had called him to, and to fulfilling his ministry, and to doing it joyfully and suffering even. He was satisfied. And that's the only place to find that satisfaction is in our Father, in committing to his purposes. So the world is fleeting, and the world forgets quickly, and the world doesn't satisfy. And then the conclusion that we can draw from all those points, and what I've been saying over and over, meaning is found out, not in. Meaning is found out, not in. Meaning is found outside of this world, not in the things of it. Meaning is found in our God, who is an eternal and transcendent God who is over it all. A God who is not under the sun, but created it and created this world. He knows the meaning and the purpose because he designed it. This God who chose to enter the mess and chaos of this world to redeem it in the form of Jesus Christ, to provide us with purpose where there was none, to heal brokenness across the world, to provide restoration, to provide joy in the midst of hurting, to provide protection for those who could not protect themselves, to provide meaning in the face of all of this meaninglessness. Jesus came to do what the world in itself could not do. He provided meaning. He provided purpose. He provided a way to invest in something that was far greater and more powerful than anything in this world. And Jesus offers this, and we can choose to find it in this world where it will fleet away and where it will be forgotten and it will be unsatisfactory, or we can choose to find it in him. And we can put our meaning in our life in a source that is outside this world, above the sun, not under it. And so, guys, as we dive deeper into this study of Ecclesiastes and true meaning, it is not anything here in this world. Our only meaning is in Jesus Christ.